Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we bring you the best guests in all of true crime. This is a STS special, Surviving My Biggest Case. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today, an STS special, Surviving My Biggest Case, and you know the mug on the screen because he is ubiquitous. This guy is all over the place. Joseph L. Giacalone. I don't think I ever knew the middle initial till just now. He's a retired NYPD Sergeant. He was a supervisor of the Detective Squad, and he is internationally recognized, just not here in the United States. That's because he has an extensive background in criminal investigations, and he's held many prestigious positions in the NYPD, the best law enforcement outfit in all the world. His favorite position was the commanding officer of the Bronx Cold Case Squad. Joe has worked on and supervised hundreds of homicides, violent felonies, suicides, and missing person cases. He is the author of The Criminal Investigative Function, a guide for new investigators, the 3rd edition. And he also has an awesome YouTube channel. Joe, where do we find the YouTube channel that you've now started?
It's it's True Crime with the Sarge. Also, just my name. It comes up in the search box. So it's closing in on 4,000 subs. So
there we go.
Exciting.
True Crime with the Sarge. It is growing fast and furious, as it should, because I'm a bonehead, but Joe actually knows about all the inner workings of law enforcement. So, Joe, this is Surviving My Biggest Case. I have no idea what you're about to tell us. You worked in the Bronx. My dad's from the Bronx, the boogie down Bronx. New York City can be an interesting place. What is the biggest case that you've survived?
Yeah, so I spent almost my whole career up in the Bronx, and it was kind of interesting in that respect. Started out, in the early 1990s, 1992 exactly. So I saw the bad old days, I saw the good old days. But we're going to tell you about a Bronx cold case that we had that actually spanned 4 boroughs and even could have been even further along. But that case is the case of a man by the name of Angel Guridy Gabral. So it was a hyphen in the middle of that. This was the case where a detective from the 3-4 precinct had gave us a case, said, listen, I have this case. There's a lot of meat on it. Maybe you guys can do something. So in the cold case squad, we actually handled a lot of cases where detectives who didn't have the time to hand over, to do the cases because they got other things going on, shootings, other homicides, where they would give us these cases. So he gave it to the detective that worked for me. His name was Mark Tebbins. Unfortunately, Mark has passed away since he's retired, but probably they wrote books about Mark Tebbins, including The Wild Cowboys and a couple other things. So he was a phenomenal guy, and he was an unbelievable detective. Anyway, so we started to take this case apart. It was a case from a woman up in Manhattan. It was on Academy Place, all the way up there in the very high part of Manhattan. And, we start looking at it, and as we're reading through the case file, we see that a DNA sample was taken at the time. Now, remember, this is the case was 1993, if I recall correctly. Remember, it's been a long time now. Might not have the exact times and dates, but.
And this guy's name again is Angel something.
Guridy, Guridy, hyphen Gabral, Cabral. You can find a couple of articles on him. There's a couple, I think I did another podcast a long time ago on this case. It's a phenomenal case. And so as, Mark is going through it and he was looking at it, he comes up to me and he said, hey, listen, we got it. We might have a potential, DNA on this guy. Now, 1993 DNA was like, we're talking about the invention of the wheel back then. I mean, that's how in the infancy stages, everything was.
Now this guy, Angel, just to be clear, he's the suspect you're looking at, or he's the victim?
He is the suspect. So
okay, and what's he accused of?
And when it's all over, we had him for 7 sexual assaults and 4 murders. So he fits the definition of a serial killer.
Wow.
And there was a couple of cases. See, New York City, just on a side note, a lot of people think New York City, because of television, right? There are lots of serial killers everywhere. And, New York City is acts of random violence, right? You step on my shoe on the subway or you look at me wrong, I stab you to death. I mean, that's basically what New York City.
Welcome to New York. Yes.
Yeah, murder is about. So it's rare that you get into a case like this and all of a sudden you're realizing, right? Because, law enforcement never uses the word serial, right? We like to use the word pattern. I have a pattern. In New York City Police Department, their definition of a pattern was two or more like similarities. Well, we didn't know exactly what we were dealing with at that point. We just figured we had one case and we have DNA on it, so let's track it down. So what happened was this guy, Angel, had gotten the cops back then had taken a DNA sample from him through consent, and he disappeared shortly thereafter, which is usually a red flag about maybe the guilt or innocence of somebody, right? As soon as that happens. Well, anyway, we call over to the medical examiner's office in New York City because that's where all the DNA is held. And lo and behold, it gives us another case and say, well, this DNA profile comes up with another sexual assault case. So we're like, okay, wow. Right. So now we're onto something here. New York City Police Department, like a lot of, there's a lot of logs and books and stuff from back in the day. So we had this thing called the murder book. And every homicide that's ever happened in New York City is written in a logbook, right? They didn't invent databases. By
the way, that's a great title for a podcast, the murder book. But go on, Joe Giacalone.
So we start looking for similar MOs. So what happened was on this case, it was a blitz style attack. The couple was sitting on a couch, and whoever it was at this time, because we didn't know who the killer was at this time, had just stabbed the victim with a pair of scissors while they were sitting, maybe watching TV or what have you. So it was like this blitz style attack. We start looking for similar cases, and we start to find a couple. We find one in Queens. We find another in the Bronx. We had the one in Manhattan. Then we find another one in the Bronx. So now we have looking at 4 homicides that are very similar in modus operandi, right? MO, where these blitz style attacks are happening in the living room. Couple of them, though, where the victim was posed, where they were, either stripped naked or they were naked at the time, what have you, and then left in compromising positions. And kind of like forcing, so when you would walk in the room, this is what you'd be faced with. So it kind of gave you a little bit of an insight on the killer that you were dealing with, right? So as from a law enforcement perspective, you open up the door to the bedroom or the living room, wherever it was, you open up a door and then the body is displayed right there, forcing you to look exactly how the killer wanted you to look at it. So for those of you that don't know what a staged crime scene, that's basically what it is. It's something that the suspect will do that he doesn't have to do. And it's just something for his benefit, nobody else's. Anyway.
I got to stop you for 1 sec, because I'm curious about this. So New York is obviously a wild place where I lived most of my life. And as Joe said, you step on. I just was hanging out with a buddy of mine who was the youngest captain in the NYPD, Tommy Russo, great guy. He worked the transit. He worked NYPD transit for a while. Was telling me how he got stabbed in the leg. But most of these crimes are just exactly that. They're not. It's not the picture that some would have of New York with full of serial killers, et cetera, et cetera. So your detectives are all working on this. You're in the cold case division. Your superiors come to you, say, look into this. What are your first steps? Because I think a lot of people think, police work is just always knocking on doors, always out in the streets. But are you taking all these case files? Are you reviewing everything? As you said, you're looking for similar cases. You're looking through old records. How much of it is like desk work versus getting out there in the streets?
Well, when you're doing cold cases, it's probably about 75% digging through files, newspaper articles. So one of the golden rules, and actually I have a new book out called the Cold Case Handbook, and I write about this. One of the first rules that you do from a cold case perspective is you see if there are what we refer to as companion cases. See if there's any other cases that are possibly linked to yours, because each one of those cases, if you find them, could have the clue to help you solve the one you have, right? So it's very difficult sometimes when you're looking at cases 20 or 30 years old to try in a pattern case to try to identify which came first. because the first case is the one you always want to find, because that's where the perpetrator made the most probably amount of mistakes. And that's the one you have to, sometimes you can never find it. And then sometimes you can do it just based on the dates of when your victims have it, right? You can then start to look at it that, but then you're always asking yourself, was there one before this, or was there two before this? And those are the kind of things that kind of, when you're investigating these things, keep you up at night, because your mind's always running, because when you're onto something, this is like, I try to explain to somebody, it's like, what the best way to describe it is, if you've ever been fishing and you get that your pole goes like this, that little nibble, and that feel of like that excitement, that rush, that you say, oh, I'm onto something here. And that's the kind of way it feels when you're doing these cases. And, supervising these cases is sometimes just as difficult, because you're the guy or girl in certain cases that have to fight the people above, right? Because the people above are the ones, they want results now. And the detectives, you have to get them a chance to do their work too. And a lot of times, and I'm sure most people can relate on that in regards to, doing their own work. I say, if you just leave me alone, I could get this done, right? I mean, I think we've all been there at one point, but
it's always the boss that's a pain in the ass. Yeah.
You know as well as I do, Joel, it never works out that way, right? So, but running interference and letting the detectives do their job is one of the most important aspects. So getting back to this companion cases, that's exactly what we went into. We knew there was one case that we had that had a DNA profile. We didn't know who this person was yet. We had other cases that were similar in MOs, right? These stabbing, blitz-style attacks that happened within the home. And, we didn't think that this could be the same person, right? Because it's all over the place. We have a Manhattan case, we have 2 in the Bronx, and we have 1 in Queens. Now, I'll just foreshadow a little bit. I just named, we have, 3 different counties now involved in this. So we have the Manhattan County, which most people just think it's, it's this Manhattan County is not, it's New York County for those that don't know. So you got New York County, which is Manhattan. We have the Bronx, which is the Bronx, right? They don't say the, it's DA Bronx.
The Bronx.
And we have Queens. So we have 3 different boroughs now, or 3 different counties. And, as cops, you don't think about this stuff becoming an issue until it becomes an issue. And we'll get down to that later on. And so we just keep on looking at these cases. So we find these other companion cases, and it could be an assault that happened here other than the actual murder, right? So a sexual assault. So we pull up these cases, and one thing that the medical examiner in New York City does is they do a really thorough job on these cases way back when. And for instance, they do a full exemplar search. So they take hair clipping, they take nail clippings, they take hair follicles from the head, from the pubic area, all those different things. And there could have been a sexual assault, so they do those tests too. And lo and behold, there were DNA profiles on those cases. But remember, this is going back in the 1990s. We didn't really know exactly what, but now in 2007, 2008, as we're putting this together, things have changed dramatically. And so the detectives have to say, listen, can we run these DNA and see what we come up with? All of a sudden, we start getting hits that all these cases are connected. Semen was found on the victims, and they start putting it together to the same profile. Now, question.
Real quick, though. So this is reminding me a little bit, because I know you went down to check out the hiking trail Rachel Morin was on. Is it similar in that there was a DNA hit, but there's no ID on the DNA? Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. There was, in order to get into, so basically there's several databases within CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System. Mm-hmm. However, the 2 main ones are, just for lack of better names, we have a known and an unknown, which we call the forensic database, which is where we hold the crime scene DNA profiles that aren't hits. And then we have the offender database, which is the people we know. Now, you could take DNA now upon arrest and put it into the system. You don't have to wait for the conviction. New York still uses that conviction part. And, because New York does everything that seems to be kind of criminal friendly, but just because of the massive amount of people too that New York has, New York City, I can probably understand why they do it. But the issue that comes down to is that these databases become an important aspect for investigators, specifically in cold cases, to try to put some of these things together. And as we're doing some of these, as we're building our cases, and we're realizing now that this guy could be responsible for at least 4 homicides. And now you're saying to yourself, geez, now it also comes down to this. So from the supervisor standpoint, the detective comes up to you and says, hey, listen, Sarge, this is what we got. We got the MA just called. We got these 4 hits. We have a serial killer on our hands. Now, do I want to call downtown and tell them what's going on? Absolutely not, right? I don't want to because I know what's going to happen. Anyway, so I do what kick it up to my lieutenant, because we had a lieutenant that was in charge of the entire cold case squad, all 5 boroughs.
Wait, hang on. If you take it downtown, do they take it away from you? Because now it's a huge case. Is that what's going to happen?
No, I wouldn't be worried about that. I'm worried about what's the pressure that's going to happen afterwards. Because remember, we're dealing with cold cases. We're not dealing with an active case right now where this guy is going around leaving bodies everywhere, where then it becomes like this huge media poop storm. This becomes now whoever's in charge going, this is going to look great for me once we close this. Right. And now I'm going to have to go give briefings. I'm going to have to go downtown. I'm going to have to tell them what's going on. Right. All the stuff that you don't want to do as, from the investigator standpoint, because you're going to have now all the stuffed shirts are going to be interested. And then, putting their fingers into this thing, and you don't want it because now everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a theory. Everyone has an investigative step that they want you to do now because, now they want to put their print on this, and that's what you worry about.
Everyone wants Joe's credit here. All right.
Yeah, but my thing is also to protect the detectives who are actually doing the brunt of this work, because they are the guys that are ones that are really, putting this whole thing together.
By the way, how many guys or guys and gals, how many people are working on this?
There was only 4 of us, 3 detectives and myself.
Okay.
That was the entire Bronx Cold Case Squad that was left. Wow. 3 detectives, and we had, I think it was 8,000 open cases that dated back into the 1990s. And so then people would want to say, well, how come you weren't closing more, right? I mean, it was just, after a while, it just gets kind of
oh my God, that's insane. And what's the time span of these crimes? When do they begin and when do they end?
If I remember correctly, it started in 94, and then there was one in 96, and then things didn't happen until about 98 and 99 again. Things just didn't happen.
And these are all women that are being attacked?
All women, right.
Okay.
So we have the DNA on these 4 cases that were tied to one suspect. However, we don't have the nexus for these women. What's the connection here? Remember, there's no dating sites back then. There's none of that stuff. So if this case would have happened today, I think detectives would say, maybe he's meeting these women online, is a dating site, right? And then the cell phone records, internet records, all that stuff that they're using today, we didn't have it back then. And you're doing, just old fashioned gumshoe work. So your next step. So after you're building all these cases, the next step now is you have to go out and start knocking on doors. You have to start calling up the victims' families, right? We know who they are, and we start putting the pieces together. So we go out on all these canvases. We go to the families, and there was one husband that was very helpful in the case, who actually kind of led us to it. And he is like everything else. Once, as the very best detectives out there know what kind of questions to ask and when they want to ask them. Everything is the timing is always has to be just the right thing. And unlike television, where they do this tag team thing, where that doesn't happen in the real world. You have the lead detective ask the questions. When he or she is done, if they're out of bullets, so to speak, they'll turn to somebody else and say, hey, you got anything else? Did I miss anything? And the other detective, or in certain cases myself, are taking the notes. We're jotting it down because, like I said, there was only 4 of us. So here's the irony, though, too, right? So we're sitting now in this gentleman's apartment where the murder happened, right? We're sitting on the couch, and we're talking, and we're doing this whole thing. And then as I'm sitting there, we're doing this, this dawns on me, right? I go, this is where the murder happened, right on the couch, in between the coffee table and the couch. So basically, we're sitting exactly where the victim's body was, right there. And this unfortunate victim, bled through the wood floors. And in certain cases, and it happens in some of these things, it not only goes through the wood floors, it goes into the apartment below. Right? It goes through the sheetrock that's there and stuff like that. And we do our conversation. We take all our notes, and he gives us some ideas about what's going on. And we leave. And I said to Mark, I said, not for nothing. Let's go back and look at those crime scene photos again. not only it was the same couch, it was the same, the same coffee table. Everything was the exact same as it was like 15 years later when the homicide happened. But those are the kind of things, like, it's a little unnerving, when you sit there going, "Oh boy, I hope they took care of clean this place." Probably the same exact couch, So
yeah,
it was a brown leather couch. I'll never forget it.
Now, were the female victims, were they all similar in age or race, type?
They were all similarly aged, in between like 22 to 24 years of age. Petite Hispanic women. Attractive, so these are the kind of things that you look at and say to yourself, all right, what do we got here? We got a guy maybe picking girls off the street. But once we start talking to the families, they're all married. They all have children. Wow. 2 of the cases, they had babies in the house when the murders happened, and they were in cribs in the next room. The kids were left unharmed. Wow. One of the victims, they found out because the baby was crying and crying and crying, that neighbors started knocking on the door complaining.
Wow.
And
and is the suspect breaking in? Do we know how he's getting into these?
No forced entry, no nothing.
Wow. Okay.
So we that could lead you as the investigator to say victim and suspect know one another. Mm-hmm. Right? So you look at things like, because remember, we're investigating this thing 10, 15 years later. So we don't have the ability to look back and say, well, but the thoroughness of detectives in these original cases, they talked about the windows, the fire escape locked, the front door was locked, no damage to the door, and then good crime scene photographers take pictures of all that stuff too. Mm-hmm. So we refer to this as the crime scene walkthrough, where we don't have the ability to go to the crime scene and see the body, and it's in what we call, in Latin phrase, in situ, in place. Mm-hmm. We have to put the scene together through the crime scene photos. And we would lay all these crime scene photos out on this table in the office, and we'd look at them, and each one of us would look at them and then make our own interpretation of what we would see in the pictures. And that's basically how we would go about doing it. So based on the information that that the husband gave us, we find out that the other women were also married. So now we're saying, it couldn't be that much of a coincidence that these women were, all having affairs with the same guy, right? I mean, to me, that's
kind of crazy.
One person you're thinking, right? Okay, maybe she was having an affair with somebody. That's why there's no, no forced entry. But 4, I mean, that sounds like like Mark was saying, and I agreed with him at the time. He's like, there is something here that we're missing, because there's no way that this could be, 4 women having an affair with the same guy, because we have DNA hits for all these things. I mean, there's no way. I mean, I don't care if he's Don Juan. This isn't happening.
Yeah. This guy's like a repairman or delivering water or something. I don't know. There's something going on here.
Right. So we figured, there is some sort of connection here, right? Mm-hmm. There's some sort, but the other problem is the distances between where these things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going from Upper Manhattan, we're going into the Bronx, we're going into Queens. And the Queens, if I remember correctly, was the 105 precinct, which is the precinct that's closest to Nassau County. So that's the furthest east part of New York City. So we're talking about extremes. We're talking about up in the North Bronx near Westchester. We're talking in the North Manhattan, all the way up near Yonkers. And now we're talking all the way on the extreme of Queens. So it's this huge triangle. So what we did was, I got that center stage or something must be on. So I try to keep my hands from talking.
That's a New York thing. This guy's delivering baby formula, doing something. I don't know.
This guy's doing something. So then we talked to all the other family members, and it's like everything else. From, when you're investigating things and people might have been involved in other things. So maybe you think there's a drug connection, right? Maybe these women were drug mules and this was the drug dealer, right? And this is they let them in. And, so this is now you're starting to think nefarious things, because that's what investigators do, right? Detectives, listen, we know most people are murdered by someone they know. We know that love, money, and drugs is probably the 3 major motives for doing stuff. So we kind of eliminated the love thing, but even though we eliminated it, it's always in the back of your head, right? You always say you got to keep it out there. And then money is one issue, and then drugs. So as we're looking at those avenues, we kind of all figure that money seems to probably be the motive behind these things. And I don't remember exactly how we came to that conclusion, but money is always is the thing that you look at, right? If it's not love, it's money. And if it's drugs, it's usually around money too. So everything kind of leads to money. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we go and we interview the other family members and husbands. It was difficult to try to track some of these down because some of the couples weren't together anymore, and now we have to find out, where they were. So and then the infighting where they don't like the ex-husband anymore. They want to kill him and everything. I mean, it just all this kind of stuff that you go through. Anyway, so we find all the husbands, we find all the sisters and brothers and everybody else. And we start to build a pattern within the pattern. And that pattern was, back in the day, these women were involved in a numbers game, a lottery system that was happening within the Hispanic community. Mm-hmm. So now we're saying, oh, okay, maybe this has to do with a robbery where these women are in charge of this lottery or working with the lottery. And then, right before something happens, now all of a sudden the place gets robbed. And these women get killed. That's the theory we started coming up with. We were pretty close. So what was happening was these women at certain points, it was run almost like a pyramid scheme. And if you don't know how pyramid scheme is, everyone gets everybody else. They put all the money in and they get to the top, and then the top person in the top gets paid out. Always. So then what happens is now some of the people who are involved in this now, we told them, listen, we're not interested in the lottery thing, right? We don't really care about what was going on with the lottery. We're not here for that. We're here because we got homicides that we want to deal with, because that's the thing that people. So, we talked to the district attorneys, whatever, and the district attorney's like, yeah, we'll give them like queen for a day. We'll do all this, the proffer. We called it queen for a day. Mm-hmm. Some people call it king for a day, whatever. It doesn't matter, but just tell us what was going on. So it ended up that they actually kept pretty good records. And the records were like, every time there was going to be a payout, the murder happened. And the person who was supposed to be responsible for handing out the money was one of these victims. And now we figured that it's got to be somebody within the pyramid scheme that knows when the payout's coming, right? So this kind of inside job, so to speak.
Wow.
So as we're doing this, of course, you always ask the question, do you ever suspect somebody from doing this? And one of the husbands tells Mark, well, there is one guy, even his wife, his mother-in-law, not his wife, his mother-in-law was stabbed to death.
Wow.
So we're like,
who is this guy?
Right. So what's his name? So they give us a name. Then we pull out that case. That case is still unsolved. Mm. So here's this woman. And at the time, the detectives, when they did the story, they said it was because of money. They said that what happened was she ran a hair salon and her air conditioner had broke down, and she had saved up $5,000 for a new air conditioning system. Now, people say, all right, $5,000 today is not a lot of money. We're talking like 1994, 1995. Yeah. $5,000 was still a lot of money. I know now it costs you like, $60 for a loaf of bread in Manhattan. And when congestion pricing hit, it's going to be $80 a loaf of bread. But anyway, now we're saying to ourselves, mother-in-law, stabbed to death. Out of all the cases that we put together, the mother-in-law wasn't sexually assaulted, which was another clue. Right? So this was another clue. That one was personal kind of thing. That was about the money. The other ones were about sexual assault and the money. As I said, the women were young and attractive.
Yeah.
So we're saying to ourselves, could this be our guy? So this is when now we take the original case and we look at it and we find another sexual assault case in the Bronx that happened years earlier, where this taxi cab driver had picked up this young girl on the side of the road and sexually assaulted her. And as he was in the act of doing this, a radio car drives by and arrests him and gives us, and this is where the name comes in. So we get the name Angel Guridy.
Wow.
So now we're saying to ourselves, could this guy be our guy? Now Angel Guridy is the guy's mother-in-law that was murdered. That's the only. So now we're saying, okay, we have a name probably for the mother-in-law. We have DNA. We still don't know whose DNA this is. Mm-hmm. So lo and behold, we find the victim. and we show the photo of the guy that we think, and she says, "Yeah, that's the guy."
Wow.
And then she tells Mark that I heard there were other cases. So what happened was this young lady didn't show up for court, and he walked on the sexual assault. I won't say the other word because YouTube, when the algorithm hears that word, they get crazy.
Please don't.
Yeah, I found that out the hard way on my show. So anyway, I digress. So as we're going through this, I mean, and this is I know I'm only talking for like 20 minutes, but this case is now we're into like 2 years into this case now, putting all this stuff together.
When did you pick up the cold case again?
It was in 2007.
2007, you pick it up, but these crimes started happening in 94, as she said?
93, yeah, 93 and 94.
Okay.
And it was 95, and then there was a break.
Okay.
So we go now to look to see if there's any other sexual assaults that happened with this guy. And we find 3 other potential cases that was a cab driver picked somebody up in and around this area. The event happened, dropped off at another location. We find all of those women, we interview them, we do a photo array, and they pick out the same guy. But remember, we're dealing with statute of limitations now on those cases.
Wow.
Yeah, we're dealing with that. But all that means is that we
no
can't,
statute on murder, though, right?
No. Statute of limitations, no such thing, for statute of limitations. But the other crime, yes. And you go by when the crime happened, not when the law changes. Like, so the New York State has changed the law several times, but you were dealing with cases, if they happened in 93, that's the year, I think it was 7 years or whatever it was. It was a much shorter period of time than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
But the district attorney told us that, hey, listen, we can't prosecute him for those, but we could bring those women in and basically say that's the guy, right? I mean, we can put him in front of a jury, and it's still powerful enough in a courtroom to say that's the guy that did this to me. So they go the detectives. I wasn't allowed to travel, so the detectives go to travel. They find him. He's in the Dominican Republic.
How come you're not allowed to travel? Because you're the supervisor?
Because they don't want to pay me they don't want to pay me to go there. I get paid more than everybody else. Yeah. I wouldn't have mind going there, but actually, Mark was this huge guy, right? Mark was like 6'5", and Tony, who was working with him, he's like 6'3". These guys were giant. Me and Steve, short guy, little small guy. It was funny because we would go into places and say, "Hey, listen, you either talk to us or you talk to them." And they look behind you, and Mark would take up the whole doorway, to be like, "All right, we'll talk to you guys." Anyway, so they go down to the Dominican Republic and they do detective work. So they go down to the Dominican police, and they had this whole setup about recording the devices and all this other stuff. Anyway, they showed pictures and say, "Do you know who this woman is?" And some of the victims. Mm-hmm. And they say, he's like, "No, I never met her before in my whole life." And what about this woman? Do you know her? Never seen her before. And they get all 4 of the victims. Never saw him before in my entire life. We have his DNA. I mean, we know this is going to be pretty much just going to be him, but he has no recollection of who this guy is. So they come back from the Dominican Republic, and we tell the district attorney what has happened. And the district attorney says, "All right, listen, we're still going to need a lot more." We go through all these other cases. There was a DNA case, if I remember correctly, there's a DNA taken from the victim who said, this is the guy that did this to me, but it was never tested. So we put that in, we asked for the test, and it comes back now to the same unknown individual. So we're starting to now saying, not only do we have the homicides, but we have this other crime now that is included into this. And now we're finding out all the other cases, all those DNA hits that weren't tested back then, that got tested now, all of a sudden, all roads lead to Rome. So now we have to get a sample from this guy. So the district attorney, because remember now, he's in another country, right? He's in the DR. He's in another country. Even though the DR is friendlier with the United States than it was in the past, it's not as friendly as, other places like Canada, right? Yeah, back in the day, going to the DR, if you were a bad guy, it was like an instant thing. This is like the equivalent of going to a place where we may send you back, we might not send you back. That's basically what you're dealing with, right? Depends on, I guess, how much money you getting. The local politicians are getting greased about how much they're going to say. You know, this isn't like, let me get on a boat to Cuba, right? This is like, at the time, it was a little iffy still for anybody to go there. He thought he was pretty safe. Well, the district attorney says, listen, we're gonna drop the arrest warrant on him anyway. I think we have enough on here. We'll get his DNA when we get him here. We'll get a judge to get us a sample, and we'll do all this stuff. Governor Cuomo was at the time, because what happens, you need what's called a governor's warrant, and the governor's warrant has to come from the state governor, has to go through the the United States embassy down in the Dominican Republic, and it's got to go through Washington first. I mean, let's put it this way: I'm making a process sound easy, but it's not. That went on for like another year to get all that stuff.
Wow.
Yes. And then that year, you don't know what's going to happen, right? This guy could just get spooked and then, flee somewhere else or do something, and then the race will be on, right? Where is he? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And Tony. He spoke Spanish, so we weren't worried about that when these guys went down, because Mark didn't speak Spanish. I didn't speak Spanish, so they're not going to send, that's another reason not to send me, if I guess.
Got to know the language.
Yes. And it's funny because, like I said, Mark was this big guy, and one of the things Mark would sweat, just like, if it was 40 below zero, he would sweat. So when they called me from the airport, I say, "Hey, Mark, I can hear you sweating from here." And he's like, "Oh my God, this is so hot down here."
So you guys, do you eventually get this governor's warrant or whatever? Okay.
Yeah. So they finally get the governor's warrant. They bring him back to the United States. They get his DNA sample, and there's a hit on all these cases.
Who makes the arrest? Is this marshals, or do you guys go down there and made the arrest?
No. Yeah, the detectives go down there and make the arrest.
Okay.
With the local authorities.
Okay.
And the feds are there too. It's a joint effort in that respect.
Okay.
Because, like everything else, some of the police departments in other countries are a little sketchy. We'll use that word.
That's sketchy. A good word. Does this guy speak English? He speaks English, right?
Very little. Yeah, he spoke very little English.
Okay.
And anyway, this case had dragged on for so long that by the time it was in trial, we were all retired from the police department. All of us. Mark, Tony, myself. I think Steve was still holding on for a little bit, but anyway, we went back. We were retired, but we went back to court.
Wow!
Because this was a marathon, right? And I think the whole thing went on maybe almost 4 years. So this was a brutal, long, drawn out battle. I used to refer to it as the Battle of Wills. And we're gonna win this because we got nothing but time. But we thought it would be wrapped up before we were retiring, but that didn't happen. But we wanted to make sure, so we ended up going to court, and there were some deals made on the table. From the believe it or not, the Dominican Republic, the government can kind of dictate certain things. Like when you're taking their citizens out, they can say, "Well, listen, you could charge them with this, but we can't charge them with that," and all because it looks bad. It's just anyway.
Right. But this guy is a serial killer and a serial sexual assaulter, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He's a double whammy, and I try to get other people. People said, "Oh, you should write this book. You should write it as a book." Like I said, but Mark passed away. He was the guy he was the guy that really did the lion's share of this work, and I just said, you know what, I'm not taking credit for stuff I didn't do.
Yeah.
And the issue that comes down to is it was a phenomenal case. It was about detective work. It was about like never giving up, right? That's the motto that we always say. You don't give up. Even, let me tell you, Joel, there were so many obstacles put in place. I mean, first of all, dealing with the People's Republic of the Bronx was a whole issue. But remember, I had foreshadowed at the beginning of the story. Manhattan didn't want to take all the cases because the cases happen in the Bronx and Queens. Same thing happens with, the Bronx. They don't want to step on Queens's toes. And we can't get one of the district attorneys to take all these cases. They don't want them. They want to just do theirs. And I'm like, you want to do 3 separate trials? I'm like, oh, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So at one point, the Bronx didn't even want to do anything with it.
Wow. Wow.
So
So what ultimately happens? You go to court. Is there a murder trial at this point? Multiple murders?
well, what happened is we burned a lot of bridges with the district attorney's office.
Oh.
So we, at this point, with the amount of work that was put in, we go to the state and say to the state attorney general, this is what we got. Nobody wants to do anything with it. And I believe it was a she at the time, an assistant there said, we'd like to do this too, but we don't want to step on everybody's toes. I mean, this is what we're getting down to. So we're like, you got to be kidding. So then we say, okay, next step is let's go to the feds. Let's go to the feds. We're trying to see if we have a federal nexus here. But what happened was, we look at it as when they took his DNA the first time around, and they did nothing with it. He fled the Dominican Republic That's why there was a break in some of these cases for a couple of years, because then he came back. So did
he commit any crimes in the DR that we know of?
I can almost guarantee you that, but they didn't even have a special, we'll call it a special victims division to do those kind of cases in the Dominican Republic.
Wow.
So, I mean, I could only imagine what could have been going on down there.
Wow.
And, of course, they're not going to, they were not really willing to come up with some information on certain things. Remember, it's much different time that we're dealing with. And when you're dealing with other countries, boy, I said, unfortunately, I wish I had Mark here to be able to fill in some of these blanks. But this guy fought tooth and nail to get this thing done. And so we go to the feds, and the feds tell us, listen, great case, but there's no federal nexus. If he would have used a gun to do this, we could have done something. But because he only used a knife, I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah, because we were going by, this guy is in the country illegally. And he's committing murder. Is that the federal nexus?
That's so crazy.
No, unfortunately, the way the statute was written, this is how it was explained to me. The way the statute is written, if it is a firearm used by somebody who is here in the country who shouldn't be, it can become a federal nexus. But because it's a knife, it's not considered a federal nexus.
So if you're an illegal immigrant and you're stabbing people, there's no federal nexus?
Apparently not. Maybe things have changed since 2009.
This is how crazy this world is. Okay.
Yeah.
But this guy eventually does go to trial, right?
But what happened was, I think it was the feds, not the state, did help us out, because they called the Bronx and said, listen, we want all the case files on this, which, Joel, what happens next, right? What happened next. So when the feds or the state, I can't remember which one it was, stepped in and said, all right, we want all the case files. Then everybody starts scrambling, right? They were not happy about us, what we did. I mean, we burned a lot of bridges because we went over everybody's head. But unfortunately, in the end, that was the only way to get the Bronx to the table. And we figured there was 2 cases in the Bronx. The Bronx has got to lead this.
What happens when they're not happy with you, Joe? Who do you get yelled at by?
Well, I don't care who they're not my bosses. They can yell at me all day long. I don't have to listen to them. But the problem is, when you're trying to get cases closed and you're bringing them cases, they, nope. They could turn into one of those things. Like, nope, I'm not bothering with you. Don't get out of here with that stuff. That's the bridges that we were worried about burning when you're doing this stuff.
Oh man.
But the only thing you count on is personnel turnover, right? You're hoping that, some of the people that don't like you are no longer there anymore. But at that point, we were all at our end of our careers anyway. And, so we looked at it as, even the next group that comes along, they won't really kind of hold that against them, because we're all gone. They might say, those guys were a-holes, so we're glad they're gone. Now maybe we can work with you guys. But,
this is such a wild look, because I don't think anyone outside of, law enforcement and like kind of the political aspect of this realizes this. You just think that cases are solved, but they're not. You have to go through all these other political loopholes and hurdles. But all right, so eventually you get someone's attention, I guess.
Yeah, we got the head of the Bronx District Attorney's Office attention, and we got called to their office. What happened is they called up the chief of detective's office first to lodge their complaint, because if they would have called me up and started yelling at me, and be like, listen, I got 2 words for you, and they're not happy birthday. Right? Yeah. So, they went and tried to make trouble with us. So, the chief of D's, who knew me pretty well, he's the one that put me in that spot. So, God. I had a nickname in the department. I was called Black Cloud, right? Because I was one of the inspectors at the time had named me that years ago. Said if you were an American Indian, your name would have been Black Cloud because everywhere you go, this black cloud follows you around. And I, like everything else, though, I went into this role as we got a job to do. We're going to get it done, and if I step on people's toes, so be it. I'm not here to protect other people's incompetence. And I used to say that all the time, which ruffled a lot of feathers. But
good for you, though.
I got, we brought on a case, and this was the same case. The district attorney, who after we laid out all these DNA cases, she says to us that she doesn't see the nexus and the connection of all these cases. And my response was, Stevie Wonder could see the nexus in these cases. And boy, did that not go over well. I would say that went over like a fart in church. So I was never one to like hold my tongue. It was like kind of like one of those filters. I just wasn't born with it.
Yeah, you and my mother, same thing.
It served me well, but it also got me in trouble too.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, I'm a grown man. What are you going to do? Put me in detention? I mean, I really don't care.
Yeah. Good for you.
People don't like you. Oh, okay, really? Oh, you know what? Like, how do you sleep at night with the fan on? Right. Yeah. So,
welcome to New York, everybody.
Yeah.
So this does eventually go to trial, right? Yeah,
it goes to trial, and he got 25 years to life. So we were there for that sentencing. We didn't go for the whole trial just because it would happen in the Bronx. Like I said.
So when was he sentenced? In 2008 or something?
I think it was 2014. Finally,
2014. Yeah. So where is he now? Do you know?
Yeah, he's in one of the correctional facilities in upstate New York.
In upstate New York. And did you ever get a chance? I mean, I know you don't speak Spanish, but did you ever kind of confront him or say, hey, your luck has run out? Anything along those lines?
Well, Mark and Tony did the interrogations with him. And, Tony did the interrogations with him because Tony spoke Spanish.
Yeah. And did he ever confess?
No, he didn't confess, but the denials were good enough because to say I don't know these women and still have his DNA and genetic material recovered on and inside the victims, it's a little difficult to explain how you don't know who these people are.
Yeah. So, I mean, on a very serious note, you got a super dangerous sexual assaulter, serial killer off the streets. What kind of feeling is that for you when you guys accomplish something like that, despite all the craziness you have to go through?
Every case we ever closed in the Bronx Cold Case Squad was satisfying, specifically when you're telling the victim's family. So when the news was broken to the family members, remember, this was back in the day when everyone had cell phones, whatever. So you had it, you did all this stuff in person. And we always, for even all, you see, New York City actually does it really well in that respect of, all death notifications are done in person. None of this stuff over the phone, unless the person lives, of course, in another state, then you're not going to drive to California to deliver the bad news. And then you have a local agency do it. But if anything happens so we went to all the victims' homes. And one of the husbands, the original one, when I told you the story about we were sitting on the couch, he was there for every trial. He was there for every day for the trial, all the way up to the end.
Wow.
You really felt bad for this guy because he never got married again. He was, this was like the love of his life kind of thing. And he had a small child that was left unharmed. Yeah. But, he went through this whole, scenario, lived through all this stuff. But I'll never forget him like hugging Mark and, at the end when this was all over, because it was just, you could see the relief like on his face, like it's finally over. And kind of part of the advocacy that I kind of brought over after I retired and try to help people, whatever I can. I mean, there's limitations per se, to do things, but, now that I've kind of gotten into the media world and done, a ton of interviews, I got a chance to get to know a lot of people. And, if I get family members that call me with a specific case, I try to get them the media attention. And I think that's part of the big thing that really a lot of these cases need in regards to, doing this stuff.
And 25 years to life, what does that really mean in New York and Florida? We're covering a case. They just got life. They always say life in Florida is life. But what is 25 years to life in New York?
It doesn't mean anything. I think New York State has let out, I think it's up to 53 cop killers now in the last couple of years.
Jeez.
And they just let out the other day the Gemini twins, who were a hitman for the Gambino crime family, who is responsible for at least 11 people's deaths They let him out. He's 69 years old, so he's still pretty young enough to,
Yeah, what's going on here?
69 is only 14 years older than me, right?
Yeah.
So, and they let him out. And I try to explain to people that, there's no more deterrent factor in some of this stuff. And when you hear some of the heinous things that some of these people did, and they're out walking the streets, and where's the victims? They're never coming back. What about the families? Those people are gone forever, and they don't have a second chance.
Yeah, this guy you're talking about, his heart's broken forever. This is why I do like in Florida, as they say, life is life. In other states, definitely not the case. But what a wild story. This is why Joseph Giacalone is a hero in my eyes. He's a retired NYPD sergeant, internationally recognized expert. He has extensive background, as you just heard, in criminal investigations, particularly cold cases. He's trained investigators from all over the United States and the world. If you open the New York Post, you're going to see his name. He's always quoted in many different newspapers, including Newsday, the New York Post, People, Fox News, all these different media outlets. And he's the author of The Criminal Investigative Function, a guide for new investigators. He's literally the teacher when it comes to this. And he's got True Crime with the Sarge, right, Joe?
Yep. Started up in August, and we went from 0 to nearly 4,000. As I just looked on before we got on, I think it was at 39.93. So, we'll see what happens. But I got a plan for this year, so it's gonna be fun.
Check out True Crime with the Sarge, and we're always trying to support each other. And we'll get Joe back on as a guest on Surviving the Survivor. This has been a special episode of Surviving My Biggest Case. Joe Giacalone getting a serial sexual assaulter off the street. Kudos to him. Till next time.